priests because they were handling the purity and the exalted character of the Eucharist once the belief in transubstantiation had been accepted. So that was the view, that this really was the very body and blood of Christ, and therefore it would defile the person if they were also involved in a marriage. But there are, in fact, lots of cases of exceptions. For example, recently the Catholic Church has permitted high Anglicans who've decided that they want to be Catholics to transfer as priests into the Catholic Church, and they come with wives. So there's no doctrinal reason why it can't happen. It's just tradition. It's a long tradition, though.
Oh, that is very, very interesting. So, look, might taking this vow make the Catholic clergy, I don't know, more susceptible to inappropriate sexual behaviour than perhaps other religious orders? Can we make that link or not at all?
I think we can partly make that link. I mean, it's fair to comment that most priests actually make the choice to enter the priesthood really very young compared to most Protestant denominations. They'll typically enter in their late teens and start a 7-year training. And so, I mean, there's a lot they don't actually know about themselves, I think, at that point. And of course, it's easy to have a very high view of the calling that you have and to put aside natural urges that you've got for a while. But those natural urges don't go away. So I think it's fair to say that any priest committed to celibacy is going to have some challenges at points. But of course, remember that those people who are priests in other denominations, they're not free from slip-ups and infidelity. That certainly happens.
Dr. Peter Lynham, thank you very, very much for your time. How interesting is that?
I think that's very interesting. It sort of doesn't excuse, in my opinion, I mean, I think the quote is, Joy said, I'm sorry for the woman concerned, but I have seen how young women flirt with priests. Do they think that a vow of celibacy guarantees immunity? I mean, that sort of harks back to that, you shouldn't be wearing a skirt that short. And, I'm sorry, I just don't think that they're appropriate remarks.
And it may, let's be frank, it might be just a young person's response to an authority figure. I don't mean flirting, it might be expressed in a way of respect. Who knows? Those kind of things are pretty difficult to tie down.
And on a fairly brief note, rounding out the show, how do you feel about someone doing a little DIY in your street in an effort to make it safer? So Sarah spent $300 on cat's eyes to create a rumble strip before a stop sign at the intersection. Liquid nails used to attach 35 cat's eyes, which were installed illegally. She wanted to make her hood safer. Is it something that you do in your own street, Selwyn? Or?
I suppose sleepless nights, hearing cars screaming down, doing wheelies and things like that gets you to do things that are more extreme, doesn't it? And particularly if your local government isn't going to be doing its job.
Takes ages.
Yes, doing the job.
Good on her.
Yeah.
Good on her, absolutely. Get up there and fix it yourself. Why not?
Think of, do I need a judder bar? Can I call the council? Let's do it myself.
Yes,
I can see the wheelbarrow now while a Saturday morning job.
Call Sarah.
You're not on Sundays now. You can be your Sunday.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anarchy.
Honestly. Jadaba, here we come. See Mitch and Sarah Manning, thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
On today's panel. Wonderful.
Lovely
Checkpoint
to be
next.
here.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, a man's in hospital after a police chase ended with a tasering and a stolen car parked up on an Auckland train platform. A proposed anti-terrorism law could mean massive restrictions on returning radicals, curfews, no-go zones and police escorts potentially for years. So is it dog whistle politics or will it actually make us safer? The two police officers who took down the alleged Christchurch gunmen are rewarded for their bravery. 500,000 New Zealanders are struggling to put food on the table, and Blair Vining, the Southlander who battled for better cancer care, delivers the eulogy at his own funeral. It's the must-win $38 million Lotto draw tonight, but stay calm, you've probably got more chance of being struck by lightning.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Prime Minister hopes the 2 police officers honoured for the arrest of the accused mosque gunman will one day be able to be honoured in a more public way. Jacinda Ardern presented the pair, who have name suppression, with the Police Association Bravery Award in a private ceremony in Wellington today. Ms Ardern says she is looking forward to a time when there can be a more public recognition of the men's actions.
There are some limitations, sadly, at the moment while we're still awaiting court proceedings, but thereafter I think the public would like the opportunity to hear more of their story and to really acknowledge them.
Jacinda Ardern says these officers do the job to serve every other New Zealander and are very humble about the work they do. A mosque shooting victim faces a nervous wait to see if his wife and 4 children can remain in the country with him. Mohammed Sahadat was on a working visa when he was badly injured at the Linwood Mosque. He became eligible for permanent residency as part of the Christchurch response visa, but this has not been extended to his family. Speaking through an interpreter, Mohammed Sahadat says there is a cloud of uncertainty hanging over them.
He was hurt that his wife and kids didn't get it, especially when some other families, like you mentioned earlier, who did receive it for the very same circumstances, and clearly his family didn't get it.
Immigration New Zealand says it is working with the family on applying for residency under other visa categories. The National Party will support a bill aimed at potential terrorists returning from Syria, but wants it to be tougher. The Terrorism Suppression Bill will give police the power to ask the High Court for control orders on New Zealanders who have engaged in terrorism activity overseas. The Greens aren't supporting the bill, meaning Nationals' votes will be needed to get it over the line. Nationals leader Simon Bridges says he thinks several changes are needed, including allowing police to detain returnees and lowering the age limit from 18 to 14.
Regrettably, children, young people have been radicalised as close as across the ditch, and so no one takes any pleasure in this, but I think it's a situation where we need to have the scope, at least, for the High Court to go lower.
Simon Bridges says he will negotiate in good faith with the Justice Minister to improve the bill. A passerby has described the aftermath of a dramatic police chase that ended with a car crashing onto a platform at Middlemore train station in Auckland. The driver is in a stable condition in hospital following the chase of a car the police say was stolen. The police say the 31-year-old will face a number of charges. The police say the car collided with another vehicle before continuing and driving onto the train platform. Ben Ross was in a train that passed by after the crash and says he first thought it was funny, but is glad pedestrians were not injured.
If this had happened at 3:10, you've got all the DRSL and King's College school kids on the platform and a shift change at Middlemore, so that could have been a recipe for a lot worse than what we saw at the time as something that was comedy.
Witness Ben Ross. The police say 2 women passengers taken into custody, both aged 20, have been released without charge. A 16-year-old male will be referred to youth aid. About 1,200 people throughout the North Island may have to be quarantined after a child with the measles attended a Seventh-day Adventist camp in Rotorua. Officials say the child was infectious on October the 5th and 6th at the Tui Ridge Park camp. A spokesperson for the Auckland Regional Public Health Service says anyone who was there and is not immune to measles will have to remain at home in quarantine until this Sunday. Julia Peters says some people may be developing the measles now.
So in the early stages of measles, it can seem like any other illness. You've got a high fever, a runny nose, cough, sore red eyes, and that goes on for about 4 or 5 days. And then you develop the rash, and the rash lasts about 4 or 5 days.
Dr. Peters says the Seventh-day Adventist camp was attended by people from Auckland, Hamilton, Lower Hutt, Wellington, Tauranga, Rotorua and Manawatu. Police have recovered a body from the inside of a vehicle that went off State Highway 29 last night and into the Wairoa River. The vehicle was recovered this afternoon and a body was found inside. State Highway 29 has been reopened and the circumstances of the crash are under investigation. MediaWorks is making cuts to local shows, including its long-time current events Comedy 7 Days. The weekly show, which has been running for 10 years, will be reduced to 12 episodes next year. A spokesperson says 7 days is much valued, but sadly is not immune to the pressure on all free-to-air content. And Guy Williams' acclaimed new comedy show New Zealand Today will not be renewed next year. The spokesperson says the channel has been thrilled with the response, but it has had to make a tough call. It's coming up to 5:05. The Silver Ferns will target Australian goal attack Gretel Tippett as they seek to extend their lead in netball's Constellation Cup series in Auckland tonight. New Zealand opened the series with a 1-goal win over the Diamonds on Sunday. Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua is confident her side can upset the Diamonds' attacking circle and create more turnover ball by putting more pressure on Tippett.
In our defence end, we weren't going for ball, so just tactically in regards to positioning and looking at our strategies as to how they could be better.
Silver Ferns defender Phoenix Karaka has been ruled out of the match due to concussion, but mid-quarter Gina Crampton is back after missing Sunday's opener with a knee injury. The test starts at 7:30pm tonight. Ireland's assistant coach Ian Foster says the team already have the blueprint to beat the All Blacks. Foster doesn't expect Ireland to deviate on Saturday night's World Cup quarter-final from the game plan they used against the All Blacks in Dublin last November. Foster says they're preparing for plenty of box kicks from half-back Conor Murray and high kicks from first five Johnny Sexton as the Irish look to target the All Blacks' inexperienced wingers.
They've got some weapons to their arsenal, and so we'll work on our high ball catches. Clearly that's something that's worked well for them, and we just got to make sure we're really proficient in that area, which we're working hard in that area, and I'm sure we will be.
Ian Foster. And the Breakers basketball captain Tom Abercrombie has signed on until the end of the 2022 season. That's the news.
In a situation where the minister has a discretion, bluntly a choice, whether to keep it temporary or grant residency, where he knows that his drunk drive 6 times, putting New Zealand in danger, he should choose the temporary.
The politically lazy thing to do is to keep kicking the can down the road with temporary visas, or you can make a gutsy decision and say, look, I think the right thing, the pragmatic thing, is to issue residency.
Both sides of every story. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online. Then on 9 to noon, a warning that being in KiwiSaver alone doesn't mean you're sorted when it comes to retirement. And after 10, author Lara Prescott on how the novel Dr. Zhivago was smuggled out of the Soviet Union. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland through to Taranaki, including Coromandel and Central High Country. Fine spells, isolated showers clearing Auckland northwards from tomorrow afternoon. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington. Periods of rain or showers, heavy and possibly thundery in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Easing tonight, then clearing. Whanganui to Kapiti, isolated showers mainly about the ranges. Patchy rain developing late tomorrow. For Nelson, Buller and Westland, mainly fine, but isolated showers about the ranges tonight. A few showers tomorrow, then rain from the evening, possibly heavy. Marlborough and Canterbury, long fine breaks. Drizzle north of Christchurch until tonight. Rain developing tomorrow evening. Otago except Clutha, mainly fine, scattered showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, fine spells, isolated showers this evening, clearing tomorrow afternoon. And Chatham Islands, rain easing to a few showers. RNZ National, it's just past 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Police chased a stolen vehicle across Auckland today, a pursuit that involved a crash with another car before it came to an end at the Middlemore train station platform where the driver was tasered. He was taken to hospital in a serious condition after suffering a medical event. Alex Perrottet and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Police say they chased the stolen vehicle through East Auckland at 10:45am and the Eagle helicopter was monitoring it from above. It crashed with another vehicle at an Otahuhu intersection before arriving at Middlemore station, where the driver steered the vehicle off the road onto the train platform and dangerously close to the tracks, scraping the bitumen with its back bumper, which was hanging off the vehicle. Commuter Ben Ross was in a train heading north when he saw the white Honda Odyssey and says he was bemused by what he saw and it could have been a whole lot worse with King's College and De La Salle College nearby.
When I saw it, first reaction was surprise. Second reaction was a bit of a chuckle because the Twitter meme that went around was Park and Ride Extreme Edition. And then the third reaction was, if this had happened at 3:10, you've got all the DRSL and King's Hodge school kids on the platform and a shift change at Middlemore. So that could have been a recipe for a lot worse than what we saw at the time as something that was comedy.
Police say they had to taser the driver, who then had a medical event. He was taken right across the road to Middlemore Hospital for attention. Police arrested the other 3 people who were in the vehicle. Ben Ross says the wide entrance to the station makes it easy for vehicles to come straight off the road and onto the platform.
Between the lift well and the station platform on the opposite side of Middlemore, so on the DRSL side, there is a big open pedestrian passageway there, and cars can easily access that if they wanted to do so. There's no bollards there.
Auckland Transport halted trains across the eastern and southern lines until 2 p.m, but there were delays as services got back to normal. Ben Ross says there was only a slight delay heading north.
What the heck was going on here? Auckland Transport handled it pretty well with Twitter and text updates and announcements on the platform. There were no delays to my service, so I got into town okay. Apart from that, as we like to say, it was just another day in South Auckland.
Police say the other occupants of the vehicle were not injured and an investigation is underway. In South Auckland for Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And the police say a 31-year-old man, the alleged driver, is still in hospital under police guard but is no longer in a serious condition. 2 20-year-old women have been released without charge and a 16-year-old male has been referred to youth aid. The alleged driver will face charges including failing to stop, endangering transport, resisting police, unlawfully taking a vehicle, assault with a blunt instrument and driving while suspended. The government is introducing new counter-terrorism laws as it prepares for the potential return of foreign fighters, like the so-called bumbling jihadi. Kiwi Mark Taylor, who has fought for Islamic State, is being held in jail by Kurdish-led forces in Syria. But it's unclear what may happen to him with new fighting along the border. The Terrorism Suppression Bill would allow the High Court to impose control orders on returning terrorists, and that could include restrictions like a curfew, electronic monitoring, as well as limiting access to mobile phones and the internet. And those orders could apply for up to 6 years. But with the Greens refusing to support the bill on humanitarian grounds, Justice Minister Andrew Little will have to look to National to pass the bill. And National says right now the bill isn't tough enough. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
The bill would apply to the likes of Mark Taylor, the so-called bumbling jihadi who joined ISIS and is currently being detained by Kurdish forces in Syria. Right now, without a passport or any diplomatic support, his chances of coming home remain slim. But if he or any other New Zealanders like him do return, the Justice Minister Andrew Little says we need to be ready.
We started a review of our terrorism suppression laws last year. As we've been doing that review, obviously the situation in Syria has been changing and in the last couple of weeks changed quite rapidly. We have to be prepared for the possibility that New Zealanders and at least one New Zealander who has gone to that area for the purpose of terrorist fighting will come back to New Zealand, and we need to be prepared for that.
Mr Little says the High Court imposed control orders would only apply to a very, very small number of people and would be tailored to the individual's circumstances, risks and rehabilitative needs, meaning the more serious the risk, the more restrictive the conditions. But the Greens Justice spokesperson, Goras Garaman, is raising humanitarian red flags and warning this could end up catching people who aren't really terrorists.
What's actually frightening about this is that we're going to rely on evidence collected by foreign agencies that may have employed torture, where we know that that's actually not going to be reliable, or are actually targeted at political dissidents rather than actual terrorists.
Ms Garaman says there are already laws in place to deal with someone like Mark Taylor coming home, and she's calling this dog-whistling legislation.
Well, it's that kind of, tough on crime, war on terror language that, especially in a post-Christchurch world in New Zealand, has no place here. We know that it will rile up fear and anxiety about something that isn't a problem. We have terror law, we have policing mechanisms. Let's rely on those.
But the Prime Minister rejects that.
No, absolutely not. This is a very practical response. We have obviously a new and emerging issue that the globe is trying to deal with. We've got to protect the safety of New Zealanders. We do have known individuals who have engaged in activity that we, of course, have strongly discouraged, that the law needs to now be able to respond to, and that's what this is about.
New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says it would be extremely naive for the government to do nothing.
Do you not understand that this is an attack on the whole of Western civilisation that you're looking at? The reality is, if someone came into this country and we didn't take the action we should have taken, when it's all over, you'd all be looking at us and screaming blue murder that we didn't act. Well, we're getting in first responsibly.
The Greens' objections mean Labour and New Zealand First will have to rely on National to get this over the line. But the party's leader, Simon Bridges, is making it clear he wants a tougher law.
The bill isn't strong enough and doesn't make New Zealanders safe enough, as there's changes we definitely believe have to be made. Effectively, they are changes that are the same or similar to provisions mainly in Australia.
National wants the police to be able to detain returnees if necessary. It also wants to increase the maximum time control orders can remain in place and to lower the age limit for them from 18 to 14.
Regrettably, children, young people have been radicalised as close as across the ditch. And so no one takes any pleasure in this, but I think it's a situation where we need to have the scope, at least, for the High Court to go lower.
Mr Bridges says he wouldn't describe these changes as bottom lines, but he says he will be strongly urging Mr Little to adopt them all because he thinks New Zealanders will be less safe without them. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
The Justice Minister concedes the proposed anti-terrorism law is pretty draconian, but he also thinks it's necessary to keep New Zealanders safe. I asked Andrew Little exactly what restrictions could be placed on the individuals he's targeting.
It would limit where people could go. It would could require them to have to, for example, go to the police station once or twice or more times a week. It would restrict them from having access to the internet. It could provide a level of curfew, but not a 24-hour curfew. So, restrictions from quite severe to quite relaxed.
Who are you targeting this at?
Anybody who's been engaged in terrorist or violent extremist activities overseas and who still poses a risk.
So this is pretty invasive stuff and wide-sweeping powers. Is there a conflict here with people's human and civil rights?
Well, it is a constraint on people's absolute freedoms, no question about it, but we're dealing with people, and this would only ever apply to a small number of people, who continue to pose a risk. So people, for example, who travel overseas in order to engage in terrorist activity, violent extremist activity, and whether or not they've been convicted overseas, but who still pose a risk. When they come back to New Zealand, it is right that we take steps to prevent them being a risk to New Zealanders, and while we have time to assess just what level of risk they pose.
That's the thing, though. They may not have been convicted of any offence whatsoever, yet they could have these enormous restrictions placed on them. I mean, how are you going to assess their threat level? Where is the proof going to come from?
So that's on the basis of the best information available about where they've been, what they've done, who they've associated with. And the way this operates is the police, having assessed somebody as posing a risk, would have to go to court to demonstrate to a judge that this person, on the basis of whatever evidence is available, does pose a risk and justifies these restrictions. It would be up to a judge to decide. If and when that person then makes it back to New Zealand, crosses our border, they're obviously then advised of the restrictions on them. They're also advised that they have a right to legal aid to challenge or to review the orders on them, and they can go through that process and they'll be supported to do that.
The level of evidence required here is based on the balance of probabilities, not beyond reasonable doubt, so a lesser test than at a criminal trial. And you were talking about making these orders in the absence of the individual at the hearing.
That's right, and the safeguard against that is that when they then do cross the border and are subject to those restrictions, where an order is issued by the court, they then have the right to and will be supported to seek an immediate review of those restrictions. The reason why the level of evidence required is at the balance of probabilities level is because they're not being convicted of anything, but they are being restricted because on the best evidence available, they pose a risk to the New Zealand community.
Some people will think this sounds draconian. Is it?
Yeah, it is pretty draconian because in the very, very small number of instances where New Zealanders or people holding a New Zealand passport have gone overseas and carried out violent extremist acts, whether in pursuit of some political cause, religious cause, ideological cause, and then seek to come back, then it is right that the government, the authorities, seek to make sure that the rest of New Zealand is safe with their presence back in New Zealand. And a lot of that will be about having the time, the means, to assess what level of risk they pose.
And it's going to be done behind closed doors, isn't it? Because it's going to be prohibited to report on these cases unless expressly given permission by the judge. So you're going to make what you've described as perhaps draconian measures behind closed doors in the absence of the person you're making the order against, and with a lesser level of proof.
Yeah, because we're not talking about conviction here. We're talking about somebody who is assessed as posing a real risk to New Zealanders.
But what you are talking about is extreme restrictions on their movements, their access to the internet, to phones, potentially electronic monitoring, curfews, no-go zones unless with a police escort, even perhaps banning them from having a bank account. So this is incredibly serious stuff, isn't it?
And that's why it will only apply in the most incredibly serious of cases. There are people who have gone, New Zealanders, people with a New Zealand passport who have travelled to conflict zones. And we know that there's an obvious example, and people have talked about it, Mark Taylor, with the express intent of participating in violent extremist activities with a religious cause, and have engaged in that sort of activity. They haven't renounced their views. In fact, within the last 2 or 3 years, he in particular called on New Zealanders on Anzac Day to kill veterans and retired servicemen and women. So these are the sorts of people we were dealing with. If they want to come back to New Zealand, which would be their right to do so, I think it is only right that they are placed under restrictions so we can assess the level of risk they pose to New Zealand.
But are you making a law for one man, in essence?
No, I
Mark
think
Taylor.
No, there are. We know that there are other New Zealanders or holders of New Zealand passports.
How many, Minister? How many?
It's a small number. It's 3 or 4 adults who would fit into that category. But also we know with the rise of other, and it's not just religious extremism, it's all forms of violent extremism that is on the rise around the world. There are New Zealanders who are attracted to that, and you cannot rule out that at some point in the future other New Zealanders will find it attractive to go into other parts of the world, indulge their violent extremism and want to return. And if they do that and are known to the authorities, we want to make sure that once they return, they don't pose an undue risk to the rest of New Zealand.
This is a step too far, though, for the Greens, isn't it? They have said that they don't support it. What discussions have you had?
Look, they were briefed on it. They indicated, they took some time to consider it, but they told me that they don't support it.
National, on the other hand, says it's not tough enough. I mean, are you going to have the support to get this over the line?
Well, National have said they'll support it to the first reading. I mean, I would hope that we're not get into some mindless sort of political who's got the hairier chest sort of argument, which is what the National Party seem to want to get the argument to descend into. I'm not into that. I think the bill, as it stands, strikes the right balance between understanding that there are people, and very, very small number, but people with extreme views who engage in violent extremist acts who would pose a risk when they return to New Zealand, and this is a way of mitigating that risk, also having time to assess the reality of the risk they pose, allowing them much freedom of movement, but some limitations on that so that the rest of New Zealand is not at risk.
Is it dog whistle politics?
No, we have a very real situation because of what's happening in Syria now and the rapidly changing environment there, with at least one New Zealander who has engaged.
Which brings us again back to Mark Taylor, Minister, because what it looks like to some people is that you are tailoring this law to one individual.
Well, he is an obvious risk, and it would be reckless and irresponsible knowing that he's expressed a wish to come back to New Zealand, knowing what he has done, knowing what he's participated in, knowing what he went to that conflict zone to do, for him to come back here and we do nothing about it when he clearly still poses a risk.
Is there some suggestion that he has been released from jail and his arrival home is imminent?
I've had no advice in that regard. The last I knew, the last advice I had is that he was still detained in a facility in Syria.
And that's the Justice Minister, Andrew Little there. It is almost 25 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm keen for your feedback on that one. Let us know what you think. The Greens say that this is dog whistle legislation. They're not going to support it. Labor obviously thinks it's necessary to keep us safe, and National says it's not tough enough. So who's right? Let us know your thoughts. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. More than 1,000 people packed into Stadium Southland today to hear Blair Vining deliver his own eulogy. The cancer care advocate who died last Friday was farewelled in Invercargill today by a huge crowd, with many people wearing their favourite rugby jerseys at his request. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown was at the memorial service and filed this report.
When Blair Vining found out last year that he had inoperable terminal bowel cancer, he decided he was going to go out on his own terms. Today, the 39-year-old father of two delivered on that promise and delivered his own eulogy. Speaking in a pre-recorded video message, he told the crowd his life changed forever almost 2 decades ago when he met his future wife Melissa and her then young daughter Della May.
You never think, when you wake up in the morning, meet the lady of my dreams and I'll be bloody bouncing her kid on my knee at 6 o'clock at night, And I love Della May right from the day one. She was a big part of your life and she is a big part of my life now, and she is my daughter.
Mr. Vining says an incredible 17 years of marriage followed, as did the birth of his youngest daughter, Lily, who is now 13 years old.
That time has gone so fast. It was very, very awesome upbringing with Lily. Like, we were living on a dairy farm. We bought a dairy farm, and she was just my best little buddy, hooning around everywhere with me, and I got to spend some real good quality years with her before she went to school.
He paid tribute to Melissa, saying she was the woman who has driven him through everything he has achieved.
You are the rock behind everything that we do. You're the driving force for everything we do, and it's really hard for me to let go. I am the luckiest husband in the world, to be fair. I really am.
Earlier, Della May told the crowd she has signed the paperwork to legally change her last name to Vining.
Now, I love netball like Dad loved his rugby. And for you, Dad, I will keep trying and trying until I reach my/our goal of playing professional netball. Dad, it's my turn to make a bucket list. On it, we'll be getting that black dress with Vining on the back for you. In every game I play, I will carry you in my heart and play with pride, just like you always said.
Mr. Vining insisted on not having a traditional funeral. Lily made sure everyone knew what it was about.
Today is not a funeral, it's a celebration of life about an amazing selfless hero. I was lucky enough to have this hero as my dad.
As part of breaking with tradition, Mr. Vining wanted everyone to wear a rugby jersey and no crying was allowed. Melissa Vining says they didn't see eye to eye about everything.
Blair comes up with the ideas and I'm his PA behind the scene doing the paperwork, and he organised his own funeral. It's very strict instructions. I definitely did not like the dress code. We had many discussions about this.
After 17 years of trying to get his wife to wear a rugby jersey, she says she finally relented today, wearing a rugby jersey worn by Karen Reid and gifted to Mr. Vining. She says while wearing it, he felt like Spartacus. He was described as many things: a great husband, a great father, a lover of rugby and cars, and someone who would do anything for anyone. His older brother, Sean Vining, summed him up in the kind of blunt and straightforward terms Blair most appreciated.
I believe that Blair Emery Vining, that's right, his middle name is Emery, should be found guilty of being an absolute legend.
Mr. Vining's beloved Central Southland College First 15, a team he coached and even as he was fighting cancer raised funds for to take on a tour of Australia earlier this year, farewelled him with a hucket as his coffin was laid onto a Ford ute. As many at the service reflected, Mr. Vining's 39 years of life will have an impact on New Zealanders for generations to come. In Invercargill, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Overseas now, and police in the Netherlands have discovered a family of 6 people at a secluded farmhouse. They reportedly isolated themselves there from the rest of the world for 9 years, waiting for the end of time. A local resident alerted police to the bizarre situation when a young man came into his bar seeking help. The ABC's Barbara Miller reports.
The strange tale began when a man walked into a bar about a week ago in the small Dutch town of Reinavold. The owner, Chris Vesterbeek, noticed him, but at that time didn't get a chance to speak to him.
Then he, in a split second, he goes away. And last Sunday, he came another time in the bar, and he needed help, he said. So I tried to start a conversation with him. And we called the cops, and they did the rest.
So that was the second time he came to the bar when that happened. Can you tell me what he looked like?
180, high, old clothes, about the 70s. And he had a beard, long hair, a bit filthy, and he was a little bit shy, disorientated.
Did he order anything? Did he drink or eat?
Yeah, the first time he ordered a couple of beers. And the second time he didn't order something, he just came for help.
When he said he needed help, did he give you details of why?
No, I don't have details about it. I just tried to conversate with him, but yes, it was very difficult. He doesn't say much. He can hardly make a real good answer to your question. He doesn't look to people. He tried to look away all the time. We talked to each other, and he was okay that we calling the cops to help him.
And what age do you think the young man was?
Between 25 and 30.
Police have not confirmed reports in local media that the 6 people discovered at the farmhouse were awaiting the end of time. They have said they appear to be a father and 5 of his now adult children. They say it's not clear if they were in what they call a confined room in the house voluntarily or not. A 58-year-old man, not the father, has been detained in connection with the case. Authorities in Vienna have confirmed he is an Austrian national. Police spokeswoman Nathalie Schubert.
Part of our investigation is to find out what the people in that house were doing exactly. There are still many questions to which we have no answer. The people have been brought to a shelter where they are being taken care of and where they will be asked to tell their story.
At Chris Vesterbeek's cafe, locals have gathered well into the night to talk of the disturbing discovery in their midst.
Yes, that's the only thing the town is talking about. That it can happen in Europe, in the world, in Holland, but that it can happen here.
How do you feel, given your involvement in the story?
I only call the police what everyone should do in this kind of situation. But I'm not the hero. He's the guy who came out the house to reach help. And it could be anything or anyone, but yeah, it's me who called.
And that was Dutch bar owner Chris Vesterbeek ending that report from Barbara Miller. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, why 500,000 New Zealanders struggle to put food on the table. Fletcher Building opens a new prefab house building facility in Wiri, and the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge swap their Range Rover for a rickshaw in Pakistan. Do get in touch about anything you've seen or heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you could send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
The Prime Minister is looking forward to a day when 2 police officers she presented with a bravery award for their role in the Christchurch mosque massacre can be honoured in a more public way. The pair, who have name suppression, were given the Police Association Bravery Award in a private ceremony in Wellington today. Ms Ardern says the court case for the gunmen accused of the March 15 shootings means their identity has to be kept secret, but she's hoping there will be a time when the general public can also acknowledge their actions. A mosque shooting victim says a cloud of uncertainty hangs over his wife and 4 children as they work to stay in the country with him. Mohammed Sahadat was on a working visa when he was badly injured at the Linwood Mosque. He became eligible for permanent residency as part of the Christchurch response visa, but this has not been extended to his family. Immigration New Zealand says it is working with the family to apply under other visa categories. The National Party wants a bill aimed at potential terrorists returning from Syria to be tougher. The Terrorism Suppression Bill will give police the power to ask the High Court for control orders on New Zealanders who have engaged in terrorism activity overseas. The Greens aren't supporting the bill, meaning Nationals' votes will be needed to get it over the line. About 1,200 people throughout the North Island may have to be quarantined after a child with the measles attended a Seventh-day Adventist camp in Rotorua. Officials say the child was infectious on October the 5th and 6th at the Tui Ridge Park camp. A spokesperson for the Auckland Regional Public Health Service says anyone who was there and is not immune to measles will have to remain at home in quarantine until this Sunday. MediaWorks is making cuts to local shows, including its long-time current events comedy 7 Days. The weekly show, which has been running for 10 years, will be reduced to 12 episodes next year. A spokesperson says 7 Days is much valued, but sadly is not immune to the pressure on all free-to-air content. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint on RNZ National, and I'm Lisa Owen. And Nona Peltier is in the studio with me for the business news. Nona, so inflation figures, a little bit stronger than expectations, but not really enough to fire things up?
Not really. Well, look, the Reserve Bank will really need to try and drive the economy into sort of red hot, movement, because to counter what's going on in the global situation, the global economic growth is slowing. So what we had was figures which were slightly better than expectations, certainly better than the Reserve Bank was expecting. So the 3 months to September, the inflation was 0.7%. That's pretty strong, relatively speaking, considering how prices have been quite weak for a while. And the inflation rate was 1.5%. So that's short of the mark. The Reserve Bank likes to see inflation around 2%. Certainly would probably like to see it a little bit higher than that at the moment. So that pretty much cemented an interest rate cut next month. And maybe even in next year, we might see some more of those. And so that meant that our dollar was probably a little weaker today at 62.7 US cents and 93.1 Australian. Against the pound, there's been a lot of interest in the UK because the Brexit talks seem to be going fairly well. Who knew? There's a lot of detail yet to be worked out. So it's a pretty positive tone. And the British pound has been strengthening. So we're at 49.2 against the pound at the moment. And I haven't seen it that low for a while.
That'll hurt anyone who's going over there for a trip, won't it?
But on the other hand, that's just the ups and downs you find with the currency market, Lisa. Now, what else do we have? Restaurant brands.
Yes, tell me about Restaurant Brands. So this is the fast food operator.
This is our chicken KFC. And not just KFC, it's also could be Taco Bell coming up.
Yeah.
So the company made a first half net profit of 20 million, but it took a big accounting hit, which we've seen across almost all companies reporting. If you took that out, it was about 25 million, which is a fairly good profit. The market certainly liked it, and their share price rose 4% to $11.64.
So they have a heap of food brands, right?
Yes, they
do. Did they tell you anything about which ones are the strongest performers?
Yes, I can tell you. So Pizza Hut was the weakest performer. Mm-hmm. Starbucks used to be, but they sold that one.
Yeah.
And Carl's Jr. was a bit of was an underperformer, but that really took off in the last half because of Uber Eats. A lot of people are ordering their burgers from Carl's Jr., and that's boosted their sales. So there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, so
the rest of the market?
The rest of the market was interesting. We finished very strongly. The NZX Top 50 Index, it rose nearly 1.25% today. At the end, it was really strong. 133 points up to a near record high of 11,179.
I can barely keep up with the yo-yoing market. 1 minute we're over the 11,000 mark, and then the next
we used to think it was remarkable if something moved 1%. But these days, I was speaking with an analyst or a broker not so long ago, and the market had moved like 0.5%. And he said, oh, yeah, the market's a little changed. It's 0.5%. He goes, oh, yeah, that's a little changed.
This is the new normal.
The new normal, indeed.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business wrap. A $15 million revamp of the country's largest off-site home manufacturer opened in Auckland today, which will now be able to pump out 500 new homes a year. Fletcher Building unveiled the new facility in Whitty this morning, which will help reduce build waste and reduce on-site build times to less than 2 months. Our reporter Jessie Chang and camera operator Patrice Allen went to take a look.
Building houses, but doing it faster and with less waste. That's what Fletcher Building is promising with its new manufacturing plant, Clevercore. The facility will build the core structural components of a home. Fletcher Residential and Development Chief Executive Steve Evans explains how it all works.
When you think about the walls, you think about an intermediate floor if you've got 2 stories, you think about a roof. What we're effectively doing is creating those components, those panels, so that they can then be assembled on site. So instead of a traditional house build that takes you, say, 7 to 8 weeks from when your ground slab is cast to when your roof goes on, it takes a day.
Steve Evans says the process includes cutting the openings for power points and doors, double glazing and insulation. The panels are then trucked out to the build site, where it is all assembled and exterior claddings are added. Mr Evans says this will reduce on-site build times by 60%, from 22 weeks to as short as 6 weeks. He's quick to point out that these homes are of the same quality as their traditionally built homes. Building waste makes up 40% of all waste in Auckland sent to the landfill. But Fletcher Building Group Chief Executive Ross Taylor says the new off-site home building factory will reduce waste by 80%.
Every time we cut, the wood chips get vacuumed up. You don't see any wood chips here. And then what we do then is we actually use them up on our Golden Bay cement plant as fuel to offset coal. If you look at the insulation, every time we cut it off, we actually reuse it on the next wall panel, so there's zero waste there. So when you go through all those things we're doing across all those bits, we've reduced the waste from one house down to a single garbage bag.
The first 100 homes to be completed by the end of the year will be going to developments in the Auckland suburbs of Ormiston, Swanson and Beachlands. The Housing Minister Megan Woods was at today's facility launch and says the government had always looked at off-site manufacturing as a solution to building more houses.
Something like this has always been part of the picture of KiwiBuild. We've built around 60 KiwiBuild houses already using off-site manufacturing. We're going through a process at the moment around establishing a panel. It certainly will be part of the future of KiwiBuild and was always going to be part of the future of KiwiBuild.
But she was firm this didn't mean the government would be setting a new target on the number of houses built. Steve Evans says a quarter of the designs Fletcher Building has for homes can be built using the off-site manufacturing facility.
It's not a conventional, I'm just designing for a house, it's designing so that it can be manufactured in an environment like this. And that takes time, that takes an engagement through the initial stages of the design process.
Mr Evans says Fletcher is now talking to 8 other architects to come up with designs to make even more houses using off-site manufacturing. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jessie Chang tēnei.
And if you were listening to that on radio, you can go back and look online at Jessie and Patrice's piece. We'll put it on our Facebook page and you can see the extent of that new facility unveiled in Whitty. A mosque shooting victim is worried his wife and 4 children may be forced to return to India because they haven't yet been granted residency. Mohammed Sahadat was in New Zealand on a working visa when he was badly injured at the Linwood Mosque on March 15th. He became eligible for permanent residency as part of the Christchurch response visa brought in by the government to help victims. But when it arrived a month ago, it did not include the names of his family who moved here to be with him soon after the shootings. Reporter Conan Young and cameraman Simon Rogers have the story.
Visitors to Sahadat's home are always told to come with an empty stomach. The former chef and his wife are known for their hospitality and insist on serving up large helpings of food from their native India. Speaking through a translator, Sahadat says the welcome has so far not been reciprocated by Immigration New Zealand.
Permanent resident में ऐसा है कि 15 मार्च को नहीं था email आया.
He said it was in the email that because your wife and kids were not present on the 15th of March, hence the reason they are not getting the permanent residence.
Was that a surprise to you? Surprise है मुझे मिल गया वो बहुत surprise. Thanks for New Zealand immigration all the people. I'm very happy.
बीवी बच्चों को नहीं मिला
तो उसके लिए थोड़ा दुख हुआ है.
He was hurt that his wife and kids didn't get it.
Sahadat's wife and 4 children, who joined him shortly after the shootings, are currently here on visitor and student visas. When he applied for permanent residency, he included the names of his family on the understanding they too would be eligible as part of the Christchurch response visa.
Because I got the invitation letter.
The invitation letter, after he submitted the expression of interest, suggested to him at the time that obviously all of them who had applied will get it. Yeah. So that's why he was surprised and shocked and disappointed when he only got his and not his family.
The criteria for the Christchurch response visa is that immediate family members must have been living in New Zealand on March 15. Because they weren't, Sahadat says they're having to jump through numerous hoops, including providing phone records to prove he's been in regular touch with them since he moved to Christchurch to work almost a year ago. This as he grapples with the after effects of the mosque attack in a foreign country. Sahadat, who may still have to go back for a 4th round of surgery on his shoulder that was badly damaged by a bullet and is still struggling psychologically, says having his family here has been vital for his recovery.
So he says really 100% support that they're here and he can be with his, and the children can see what his dad's going through as well, and he's getting the support from his wife as well, being here.
And so how does it feel now knowing that your family is going to have to wait to get this permanent residency? It must feel very uncertain.
So he is a bit tensed and anxious that, that his family hasn't got it. Only him.
And is there any indication how long this process will take before they are granted residency?
कितना टाइम लगेगा बोल रहे? No idea.
No idea.
Deborah Lemon, who's been advocating for Sahadat and his family, says it's a lot harder for them to access healthcare, for example, when they don't have permanent residency.
Sometimes you're okay because the husband has got residency and they don't get charged, but some places they'll be charged because they don't have a residency themselves, so they'll be charged as if they're international visitor.
With Sahadat's ability to return to work still up in the air, the family continue to rely on temporary accommodation being made available by MSD. This runs out by the end of this year, when they hope to get into a Housing New Zealand home. But Deborah Lemon says this too could be difficult without residency.
Because they have to be here as a resident for 2 years, it means that they're not eligible for social housing. We're hoping that maybe that might be relooked at because we've had timelines be changed for getting payments and helping them with work and income payments. So hopefully Parliament or government might have a look at that at a later stage.
Things have not been easy for Sahadat and his family since March 15, including 2 occasions when they were subject to racist taunts and threats of violence. Since then, though, things have started looking up a little bit, with numerous offers of money and help coming in from those who heard the story, including a new washing machine so his wife no longer has to wash their clothes by hand. Sahadat is grateful for the support and still hopeful Immigration New Zealand will show the same generosity to his family. Kei o te tahi ahau mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Immigration New Zealand says while it is sympathetic towards the family situation, it does not have any discretion when considering a person's eligibility for the Christchurch response visa. However, it says it's continuing to work with the family on other visa options that may be available to them and notes they still have the option of seeking ministerial intervention. Again, if you were listening to that story on radio, you can revisit it online, that story from Conan and Simon, and see the picture pictures there and the interview with Sahadat. It is almost 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Should an exception be made for his family, his wife and children who were offshore at the time of the attacks at the Christchurch mosques? It's estimated about 500,000 New Zealanders are now struggling to put enough food on the table. New research from the Auckland City Mission has painted a bleak picture of just how many people are experiencing food poverty. It says without enough money, some people have no other option but to skip meals or eat poorly or turn to charities for help. Our social issues reporter, Sarah Robson, has more.
Renee Manella is a solo mum who says it was a struggle to put food on the table when she was on a benefit.
You just end up buying just really rubbishy food, it's like $1 pastas and then $1 loaf of bread because that's what fills people up.
And Renee isn't the only one who's struggled to feed her family. Over the last few years, the Auckland City Mission says demand for food keeps going up and up. It handed out 40% more food parcels last year than in 2017. But until now, its General Manager of Social Services, Helen Robinson, says information about food poverty in New Zealand was outdated and sparse. But her research, which involved interviews with 650 people who were accessing the City Mission's food bank, estimates about 10% of the population is affected by it.
Much of what the mission has discovered through this research has not what I would call rocket science, but what it does do is give us the capacity to both measure the severity of the food insecurity people are experiencing, and it gives us the evidence to say that it impacts people's well-being and their psychological distress.
About 40% of those surveyed had struggled to access enough appropriate food for their household for 2 years or more. Helen Robinson says it's a lack of money that's at the heart of the problem.
We hear that people who are coming are very good at budgeting, are very capable at doing things, but that actually there's just not enough money coming inside the door.
Trevor McGlinchey from the Council of Christian Social Services said food poverty isn't just affecting Aucklanders. Groups around the country are telling him that demand for food is growing.
An organisation that may have been distributing 100 food parcels a month 5 years ago, today will be distributing 200 to 300 food parcels a month.
Trevor McGlinchey says when money is tight, food always comes last.
So people always pay their rent, they pay their power, they fix up their car if they need it to get to work and back, and at the end of the day, the thing that there's nothing left for is food.
And Helen Robinson says it's women who bear the brunt of it.
If you are a single mother in New Zealand, you are more than likely to be in that group who really are struggling to be food secure.
Back in Taranaki, Renee Manella knows exactly how that feels. The mother of two is working part-time now, but she says money is still tight. Her weekly food budget is $140.
The tough pressure is off. But I still wouldn't say that I can buy whatever I wanted in terms of food.
The Auckland City Mission is calling for an annual survey to measure food poverty and its effects. It also wants benefits and the minimum wage lifted and consideration given to extra support for women raising children. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have made a colourful entrance as they arrived by auto rickshaw for a special reception hosted by the British High Commissioner to Pakistan in Islamabad. Kate wore a glittering green dress and William a traditional Sherwani suit for the event at the Pakistan Monument. The royal pair are on a 5-day tour of the country. The BBC's Secunda Kumani was there.
Arriving by rickshaw, the royal couple pulled up at their last engagement of the day, a reception designed to celebrate the UK's links with Pakistan. There was no mention by Prince William of Britain's colonial history, but he spoke of the contemporary ties between the countries.
The UK and Pakistan share unique bonds, and so it will always be in our best interests for you to succeed.
Earlier in the day, the trip kicked off with a visit to a school in Islamabad. Education, along with climate change, are amongst the issues the couple want to focus on in particular. They also met Pakistan's Prime Minister, cricketer turned politician Imran Khan. British officials say this trip will focus on showing Pakistan as a forward-looking country, and that's something many people here welcome.
I mean, it's a great message to the world outside to tell us that how Pakistan's a new country, we're up and blooming, and we're not as what they portray us to be.
The timing is really good. Pakistan needs to improve its soft image.
Princess Diana's visit attracted media attention.
The tour has an added emotional significance for Prince William as he traces some of his late mother's footsteps. Princess Diana made 3 visits to the country in the 1990s. Here in Pakistan, the hope is that this royal visit will encourage people to see the country in a more positive light and to be more willing to come here themselves.
Secunda Kamani in Islamabad. All Black players in Japan say the hardest thing in the long breaks between games at this World Cup is thinking about and missing their families. If the defending champions reached the final, they would have been away for more than 2 months. And it's not just the players, there's the coaches and officials. And let's not forget our reporters. Joe Porter has been there since before the first kick-off and is in for the long haul as well. Joe has 3 kids, a 6-year-old daughter, a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son, and he caught up with All Black flanker Matt Todd, who also has 2 young girls and a baby boy. The 2 men caught up about raising those little kids, how much they miss them, and also remembering who is doing the hard yards at home.
Yeah, it is tough, it's probably harder on the wife left back at home. She's the one that has to look after them and get them sorted each day and whatnot. So it's tough, especially I guess if they're sick or, they're struggling back at home, then you feel a bit useless all the way over here. So
do you say youngest was 1, is that right?
Yeah, youngest is 1.
So it's hard, I guess, being away for a couple of months because 1-year-olds can change a lot in 2 months.
Yeah, they certainly do, and like even just, FaceTime them, seeing them on, on a screen, you can see the changes and the development that they have in that time. So I guess it is tough when if you're away for milestones, they take their first steps or stuff like that. Or like my daughter's got her birthday next week, so you're away for stuff like that can be tough.
How do you find it when you've had a tough day at the office and you can be a bit frustrated, but you know that back home things are actually 100,000 times harder, and you try not to, I guess, reflect that frustration when you're talking to your wife because she's going, well, hey, mate, I'm here with 3 kids. You got the easy job.
Yeah, exactly. No matter how tough it's here, you're not going to get any sympathy from back home, that's for sure. So I think it's just awareness, especially around dinner time and it's chaos in the background and screaming and it's all go. You've got to try and be as supportive and understanding as you can be and know that it's tough for them. It's tough when you are over here and they are struggling. It's even harder because you're over here, feel useless.
This is the longest I've been away from my kids and I'm certainly struggling a bit. How do you find it when your kids are, upset on FaceTime, for example, and you can't be there to comfort them?
Yeah, it is definitely tough, and seeing them upset, seeing them sad or struggling or sick, and when you can't be there to help, it is tough, and it never gets any easier as well, Have
you ever had any moments where you're just like, I just want to get back on that plane and get home?
Oh, I guess from time to time you do. It's like you say, when they're upset or they're struggling or you're missing milestones or something, special stuff for them, it can be tough.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on, you've got 2 daughters, similar age to mine, how important it is to role model the kind of behaviour, especially the way you treat your wife in front of them, because a lot of research would suggest that daughters end up being in relationship with guys that models the same that you treat their wife in a way, So if you treat them really well with a lot of respect, if they ever find themselves in a situation that perhaps is slightly abusive, they'll know that's not right and they'll get out, whereas if you don't, the flip side can happen, yeah?
Yeah, for sure, and that my wife's always talking about that. We want to raise, I guess, strong-minded daughters. So a strong-minded woman in that, and teach them what is right and wrong, and what's acceptable and what's not. As a parent, you're always learning and developing in that. So you want to try and raise your children as best you can and instill the best values and that you can in them.
When you do get frustrated, you've got to sort of take that step back and control your emotions, and I guess say to them, look, it's okay to be angry, sad, upset. This is the better way to deal with it. Come away, reflect and calm down a little bit rather than, blowing up.
Yeah, it is, and I think being a parent, it teaches a lot of valuable life lessons about how to deal with different situations. It is frustrating at times or stressful at times, but like you were saying, the better you can handle and deal with those situations, that's what your kids see and that's what your kids learn, and that's what's important as a parent, that you are in control and showing, the children how you want to, I guess, act and respond to different situations.
And that's Matt Todd talking with Joe Porter in Japan. Time for some of your feedback before the 6 o'clock news on the proposed new terrorism laws, which would allow control orders, so controls on returning terrorists or radicalised people. A lot of people are supporting Andrew Little here. Bill says, I thought Andrew Little has addressed the issue very well and I couldn't fault his proposals. Tim says, I believe the proposed legislation for returning terrorists is both appropriate and required. Legislation is usually reactive, as it is near impossible to draft legislation for what-if situations. Mark Taylor provides legislators with a definable test case, thus increasing the likelihood of the legislation being workable and appropriate. Others not so keen, though. This one in from Azar, who says, how can the Minister ensure this law secures Kiwis? I believe it's against Kiwis. How can we ensure it's limited to extremists? What if they extend it to whistleblowers, to people against governmental corruption, to communists? What is the definition of extremists? Someone else says, if this legislation had been forced in the 30s, then those who went to Spain would be subject to it.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The Green Party won't support new terrorism legislation because it has concerns it could be applied to people who aren't terrorists. The Justice Minister Andrew Little has introduced a bill in preparation for the possible return of New Zealand fighters from Syria. It would allow the police to apply for control orders for people involved in terrorist activity overseas. The Greens Justice spokesperson Golriz Garaman says the bill is frightening because it relies on another country's definition of a terrorist. She says in a country like Iran, that could apply to feminists or political activists, and this is dog whistle legislation.
Well, it's that kind of tough on crime, war on terror language that, especially in a post-Christchurch world in New Zealand, has no place here. We know that it will rile up fear and anxiety about something that isn't a problem. We have terror law, we have policing mechanisms.
Golriz Garaman, the Green Party's Justice spokesperson. The officers who captured the man accused of the Christchurch mosque massacre have been described as amongst the bravest in the history of the police force. The officers who have name suppression have spoken about the March 15th attacks for the first time. They say they were just doing their job and say their families are proud of what they were able to do. They were both given the Police Association Bravery Award by the Prime Minister this morning. The association's president, Chris Cahill, says the officers are humble men and have been offered psychological support.
And that sort of highlights that these people aren't superhumans. They're just like you and me and other police officers, but they acted with outstanding bravery that day.
Chris Cahill, the president of the Police Association. A passerby has described the aftermath of a dramatic police chase that ended with a car crashing onto a platform at Middlemore train station in Auckland. The driver is in a stable condition in hospital following the chase of a car the police say was stolen. Amy Williams reports.
The 31-year-old driver is expected to be released from hospital today, and police say he'll face a number of charges. The police say the car collided with another vehicle before continuing and driving onto the train platform. Ben Ross was in a train that passed by after the crash and says the car was very damaged and he's glad pedestrians were not injured. The police say 2 women passengers taken into custody, both aged 20, have been released without charge. A 16-year-old male will be referred to youth aid. Ko Amy Williams, TNA.
Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam was forced to halt her annual policy address today after some lawmakers disrupted the session, shouting and jeering as she started her speech. Ms Lam, who is backed by China, was due to announce a raft of property initiatives in a bid to restore confidence in her administration after more than 4 months of anti-government protests. The US Vice President Mike Pence and Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, have refused to cooperate with an impeachment inquiry. Both men say they will not respond to subpoenas for documents related to Donald Trump's efforts to pressure Ukraine into investigating his Democratic political rival, Joe Biden. Mr Pence says the Democrats must hold a vote in the House of Representatives before an impeachment process can continue. But the leader of the House, Democrat Nancy Pelosi, says there will be no such vote for now.
There's no requirement that we have a vote
And so at this time, we will not be having a vote. And I'm very pleased with the thoughtfulness of our caucus in terms of being supportive of the path that we are on, in terms of fairness, in terms of seeking the truth, in terms of upholding the Constitution of the United States.
The US Constitution does not specify whether a House vote is required before a formal impeachment inquiry starts. A 35-year-old man has been sentenced to 2 years and 6 months for possessing, distributing and making objectionable images. The man was found in possession of 1,550 images and videos of child pornography in September last year. He was sentenced to 4 months due to 2 objectionable images of his 3-year-old daughter, but that was reduced as the defence argued they were not taken for a sinister purpose. The initial sentence of 4 years and 6 months was reduced as the man pleaded guilty, showed remorse and offered his help to authorities. Scientists say the humpback whale population, ravaged by industrial whaling in the southwest Atlantic in the early 1900s, has all but recovered to full strength. An estimated 25,000 whales were butchered by industrial whaling. The BBC's Jonathan Amos reports.
This is a distinct group of animals that winter off Brazil and feed in Antarctic waters. When the steam-powered boats and harpoons initiated industrial whaling operations from the remote island of South Georgia, this was the population that was targeted first. But an outright ban on humpback hunting allowed the Southwest Atlantic group to begin its recovery. And today's assessment is that this particular population is now 95% of the way to its pre-exploitation total.
Jonathan Amos with that report. It's coming up to 6:05. The Silver Ferns defender Phoenix Karaka will miss tonight's second Constellation Cup netball test against Australia in Auckland because of concussion. Karen Berger will likely get a start at goal defence, or coach Nolene Dorua may move Katrina Rore back into the defence circle. Mid-quarter, Gina Crampton returns to the play squad, having missed Sunday's opening win through injury. A win tonight would give New Zealand a rare hat-trick, and Dorua is determined to establish a mental edge over the Diamonds.
We need to cement ourselves in regards to our strategies and I suppose our dominance out there on court. We got a lot of confidence out of that win and now we need to keep building.
The test starts at 7:30 tonight. New Zealand has failed to lure the National Rugby League Grand Final from Sydney. The Queensland, Victorian, Western Australian and New Zealand governments showed interest in bidding for the showpiece event, but Sydney will keep the match after reportedly agreeing to a new $10 million deal with the New South Wales state government. The Breakers captain Tom Abercrombie has extended his contract with the basketball club to the end of 2022. 32-year-old has played more than 300 games for the Breakers and is their all-time leading scorer. The Breakers begin their season against Sydney on Friday. The Football Ferns will play in a 4-team tournament in China in November, their first outing since the World Cup in France in June. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Jade Kake, architectural designer, housing advocate and researcher on the potential for a renaissance in Papakainga, bringing a communal Māori approach to affordable housing. She's writing a book about it. And then there's a sofa session with this Scottish outfit, Shoe Glenifty. Folkedalic on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel and Central High Country. Fine spells. Isolated showers clearing Auckland northwards from tomorrow afternoon. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne through to Wairarapa and Wellington. Periods of rain or showers, heavy, possibly thundery in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Easing tonight, then clearing. Whanganui to Kapiti, isolated showers mainly about the ranges. Patchy rain developing late tomorrow. For Nelson, Buller and Westland, mainly fine, but isolated showers about the ranges tonight. A few showers tomorrow. Then rain from the evening, tomorrow evening that is, possibly heavy. Marlborough and Canterbury, long fine breaks. Drizzle north of Christchurch until tonight. Rain developing tomorrow evening. Otago except Clutha, mainly fine. Scattered showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, fine spells. Isolated showers this evening, clearing by tomorrow afternoon. Chatham Islands, rain easing to a few showers. RNZ National, It's coming up to 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A human rights lawyer says a proposed anti-terrorism law that could see sweeping restrictions placed on suspected terrorists returning to New Zealand is heavy-handed and appears to be tailor-made for just one man, the so-called bumbling jihadi Mark Taylor. The Suppression Terrorism Bill would allow the High Court to impose control orders on returning terrorists, and those can include restrictions like a curfew, electronic monitoring, as well as limiting access to mobile phones, the internet and even bank accounts for up to 6 years. Mark Taylor, who has fought for Islamic State in the Middle East, is being held in jail by Kurdish-led forces in northern Syria. But that could change now that Turkey is battling Kurdish fighters along the border. Human rights lawyer Michael Bott says the proposed law is not only overreaching, but it's an overreaction to a limited problem.
For a start, one needn't even have to be convicted of an offence. And you have these draconian orders put upon you with the threat of imprisonment because of how some other person overseas has labelled you. So there has to be some kind of measure in relation to that, or some kind of tweaking or protection in relation to that, because to have someone travel overseas to be labelled in a certain way, then to face on an interim basis even quite draconian orders that can basically have electronic monitoring involved, can control access to bank accounts, and basically live a normal and free life, on its face seems disproportionate and severe. One's also worried about, for example, the ability for political manipulation by offshore operators. Like I remember the Auckland case, where our intel, the SIS in New Zealand, basically assured lawmakers and courts that there was strong evidence of terrorist activity on the part of Mr. Zowie, and yet when finally the sunlight was brought to bear on it, there was nothing there at all. He quite easily could be released into the community. So one has learned over time to have little faith or a high degree of scepticism in intel provided by, shall we say, nefarious or draconian regimes.
The level of proof required by a quick read of this bill is the balance of probabilities. Can you put that into context for people listening in terms of how that compares with a criminal trial, for example?
Well, in criminal courts, to essentially found a conviction, normally you have to have proof beyond reasonable doubt, which judges will maintain as being the highest standard known in criminal law. So you have to be so sure that there is very little doubt. And where there is doubt, it must be exercised in favour of the defendant. On the balance of probabilities, means more likely than not. So it's a substantially lower evidential threshold to meet than beyond reasonable doubt.
Is that appropriate given the level of restrictions that could be applied here? Is it appropriate to have a lesser level of proof?
I would argue no, simply because you've got a penalty if you breach of up to a year's imprisonment. So when you've got a year's imprisonment as a penalty, one would hope that the evidential threshold would be more significant, such as beyond reasonable doubt. Because basically greater than a coin toss plus one is not of great comfort, really.
This would also mean that the hearings, in essence, are, well, in relative secret. There would be restrictions on publishing the details unless given explicit permission by the court. And I also see that the proposal is that the orders would be handed to the person on their arrival back home. So what does that mean in terms of their legal representation and being present during the course of a hearing like this?
Well, for example, it means that when an interim order is made, so it can be handed to the person upon their arrival, that what's happened is that the order's been made in their absence and there's been no one there to actually represent them and raise relevant questions. And so that creates concerns in itself. One has to ask, why isn't there any lawyer advocate involved at that stage to actually have some kind of vetting? That also raises a significant human rights concern, because you're having a person given an interim order, which if they breach, they're going to run the risk of imprisonment that subjects them to a very draconian regime on the basis of evidence they haven't seen. Well, what a chance to respond to.
Given you have some concerns about this, I mean, what are we supposed to do with these people? If not this, what is the answer?
Well, these people, how many people are there? So far I know of one who happens to be a rather ineffective, almost Keystone Cop type chap who's been arrested and spent, some considerable time in Syria in detention. So I don't know much about him. He obviously, as a citizen, has a right to come home. He may present a risk. I don't know. And it's appropriate, if that is the case, that he is monitored to a degree. Now, is it appropriate that the degree of monitoring is such as this in this proposed bill? The difficulty is that the road to hell, as people used to say, is paved with good intentions. And in this case here, in relation to one person, is this legislation going to keep us safe? Arguably no, simply because it doesn't capture those people who've actually posed a greater threat to New Zealand security and safety in very recent times in Christchurch, whereas this chap overseas, Mr. Taylor, tailored for that, I suppose, but it's not going to be effective in the long term. It's open to abuse because, as I've said in the past, the intel and the definition of terrorism does change and vary from country to country. So the mere fact you've been convicted of a terrorist activity overseas, for example, shall we say in China or even in Myanmar, it doesn't mean, in fact, that you're actually involved in terrorist activity. That's just something that some autocratic power has labelled you as. So that's not enough.
Is it an overreaction, in your view, to a limited problem?
I would argue yes. I think it overreaches. As I say, one understands the reasons for this, but I think there has to be greater consideration paid to basically natural justice and due process. To basically hand someone an interim order that they haven't had a chance to respond to is I think, unfair and a breach of natural justice.
Human rights lawyer Michael Bott. We were just doing our job. That's how the two police officers who took down the alleged mosque gunman described their actions on March 15th. The two officers were driving on Brougham Street in Christchurch 5 minutes after reports of shots being fired at the Linwood Mosque and 20 minutes after a gunman had started killing people at the Al Noor Mosque. The two officers saw a car which they believed was driven by the shooter and took the chance to stop and arrest the heavily armed man. Today, they were honoured for their work that day with the 2019 Police Association Bravery Award. Rachel Graham has more.
The two officers' names have been suppressed, so for now they're only known as Officer A and B. In a joint statement, the men say that for them, knowing they played their part in possibly preventing further casualties was very important to them. They say their hearts go out to all the families whose lives were torn apart that day through death or injury. 51 people died from the mosque shootings and dozens were injured. The men say they were doing their job that day. They say all officers want to keep New Zealanders safe, and when they can't do that, it cuts deep. The president of the Police Association, Chris Cahill, says their actions may be one of the bravest performed by police officers in New Zealand.
It certainly has to be right up there. Making the decision to go forward and act and arrest that offender when there was clearly considerable risk is something that would take a lot of beating and any act of bravery.
It is believed that the gunman was on his way to another target. During the arrest, the officers seized 2 assault rifles and at least 1 semi-automatic rifle. The two officers say because they had a good knowledge of Christchurch and were experienced officers, they had the foresight to consider potential escape routes, which brought them to Brougham Street, one of the city's main roads. At that stage, they didn't know if there was more than one offender, but they believed there was a good chance the offender, or offenders, had left the mosques. The officers say they had known each other for years and had total trust in each other's abilities, and that they would continue to do their job, regardless of what they encountered. Chris Cahill says other officers are incredibly proud of the courageous actions of their colleagues.
It's very emotional for all the police officers, and knowing that 2 of their officers stepped up and showed such amazing bravery when it was most needed, reflects on them all, and they're incredibly proud.
The award was presented by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern this morning in a private ceremony. Ms Ardern says she is looking forward to a time when there can be a more public recognition of the men's actions.
There are some limitations, sadly, at the moment while we're still awaiting court proceedings, but thereafter I think the public would like the opportunity to hear more of their story and to really acknowledge them.
Chris Cahill says the two men are humble and a bit overwhelmed by the attention. He says it has been a challenging time for the officers in the subsequent months, but they have been offered extensive support.
We've had one of our field officers dedicated to looking after them, and police have also, working with police, psychological assistance been available to them, and just the ability to speak out and ask for help when they've needed it has been really important. And that sort of highlights that these people aren't superhumans. They're just like you and me and other police officers, but they acted with outstanding bravery that day.
The trial is due to start in June next year, but the case will be back in court in December for a pre-trial call-over. In Otatahi for Checkpoint, ko Rachel Graham tēnei.
It's almost 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In Papua New Guinea, police are urging former Prime Minister Peter O'Neill to meet with investigators after a warrant was issued for his arrest over corruption allegations. Mr O'Neill denies any wrongdoing and says it's a political witch hunt. The arrest warrant, the second issued against Mr O'Neill, comes as the country grapples with other corruption concerns.
In the nondescript Port Moresby Police Headquarters, the Acting Commissioner, David Manning, delivered a shock statement.
A warrant of arrest was issued last Friday for the former Prime Minister and member for Yalibu-Pangia, Mr Peter O'Neill, for official corruption.
Police say details of the allegations can't be released because of the sensitivity of the investigations, which are ongoing. Peter O'Neill resigned as Prime Minister in May after almost 8 years in the job, following mass walkouts from his government. Acting Commissioner Manning says Mr O'Neill isn't cooperating with the investigation.
My appeal as the Acting Commissioner of the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary to Mr O'Neill is to avail himself to the investigators and allow for the process to be completed.
Peter O'Neill has hit back, claiming he wasn't issued with a warrant or asked to appear anywhere by police.
But there is nothing that we are afraid of or fear, because we have done nothing wrong.
Mr O'Neill says the allegations relate to the renovations of a health centre, but he told the ABC the investigation is politically motivated.
There is a lot of political witch hunting going on at the moment, and that's understood. And the acting police commissioner has been used to intimidate and arrest members of parliament.
But the acting police commissioner has rejected those claims.
Under my leadership, I will not allow police investigations to be politicised, nor allow for people with vested interest to use the police for personal vendetta or witch hunting.
It's not the first time an arrest warrant has been issued for Peter O'Neill. In 2017, the Supreme Court quashed a long-standing warrant issued in a different corruption inquiry. Stephen Lawrence from Transparency International PNG describes it as an ongoing saga.
A bit sad for the country that we have this so frequently, but again, it's a sign that we have a flourishing democracy. We do have people who follow things through. Let's hope that what they're working on is justified and that we see a good outcome.
It comes as separate concerns are raised about millions of missing monies from the country's hosting of APEC. The new Prime Minister, James Marape, told the ABC it's too early to make corruption allegations in regard to the matter, but he is concerned.
And the country deserves to know, and all the stakeholders who supported APEC deserve to know exactly the status of those expenditures.
And a commission of inquiry into a controversial $1.2 billion government loan in which both Mr O'Neill and Mr Marape are implicated is scheduled to begin this week.
Natalie Whiting in Port Moresby. A section of a busy street in Auckland's city centre has been transformed to be a little more pedestrian friendly. It's a trial phase of a wider plan to make the CBD more walkable, but some businesses are sounding a note of caution about changing the cityscape. Our reporter Chen Liu has the story.
There are 60,000 people who call Auckland city centre home, and every day more than 100,000 people travel into the city. It took only 3 nights for High Street to be transformed between Shortland Street and Vulcan Lane. Pot plants line the northern end of High Street, and car parks have been replaced with loading zones. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says it's going to make a difference for those who use the street the most.
You bring your shoulders in to walk down some of those areas of High Street because it's only a metre wide, and then you get here and then people can go back to being people, and you feel that this is an area that's made for you and not an area that just you're dodging the pedestrians and you're dodging the cars.
A woman who doesn't want to be named walks along the street every day. She says it gets crowded quickly and it's good to see the changes.
I think it would be great to have it just pedestrians and no cars anymore. Make it a bit more welcoming, I guess.
13 car parks have been taken out and replaced with 25-minute loading zones. Martin Lagamvani, who often delivers goods on the street, is glad private cars are no longer parking there.
It's very good for delivery because sometimes we have a private car parked to loading zone. When the time has come for loading, it's very hard for me because there is no time to moving out.
Murray Crane, a long-time business owner on High Street, has been involved in developing the pedestrian plan. He says he's all for it, but wants it to be done right.
Ultimately, the customers and the pedestrians will tell us what they want and how they want it to work properly. Change is good if it modernises the street and we don't lose our own identity as a district. That's probably my biggest concern. We don't want to just be part of a kind of homogenised plan for all of Auckland.
Phil Goff says he was asked, why not transform the whole street all at once?
The idea of not doing it now was actually to trial this, to involve people that work, own businesses in the street, and visit the street to say, hey, have we got this design right? Is it better to do it this way? It's a co-designed process, so it's inherently democratic.
The second phase of the pedestrianisation trial will run from Vulcan Lane to Durham Lane and is planned to start from February next year. Feedback from the public on the trial will be taken into consideration. Mo te hotaka o te ahi nei ko Chen Liu tēnei.
And finally tonight, with a 1 in 38 million chance of winning it all, the odds are, well, slim. But that has done little to stymie the optimism of those who have taken the plunge and purchased a ticket for Lotto's $38 million prize draw tonight. Nicholas Poynton went to see if there's any way to improve your chances.
You have a greater chance of being struck by lightning is the phrase any statistician will say about your chances of winning the Lotto. They may be right, but is there anything you can do to increase your chances of winning? Well, Otago University statistics professor Martin Hazelton has 2 pieces of advice.
First, there's no such thing as lucky numbers, and certainly the fact that a particular set of numbers has never come up or something doesn't increase the chances that they suddenly will. There's no sense in which, there's sort of a bunch of numbers just waiting to happen.
Mr. Hazelton says there is one way you might be able to slightly maximise your payback.
If you pick a set of numbers which is in some sense unusual, then if you were lucky enough to win, you probably win more because there'll be less people who actually select those numbers.
Purchasing a ticket for this week's Powerball was a no-brainer for former Australian resident Jennifer Brown.
I'm from Australia where the odds are a lot worse, so I feel like I have a better chance here than at home, so why not?
She admits that her 1 in 38 million chance of winning is difficult to comprehend.
When you say it, it doesn't really sound like a lot, but I'm sure if you got 38 million people and put them all in the same place, it would be a lot of people.
That wouldn't be enough to deter you, though?
Like I said, you've got to be in it to win it.
Laura Williams purchased a ticket as a pick-me-up after a particularly tough week. She knew exactly what she would do if she won big.
Holiday, wedding, house, and then save the rest.
In that order?
Yeah, probably.
One can fantasise, but it is truly difficult to imagine what an injection of millions of dollars would have on someone's life. One woman says winning her share of a $30 million jackpot has transformed many more lives than hers for the better.
There's definitely been a share the love
Their lives are just so easier and not so fraught with the everyday grind that people go through that are working and living, pretty average New Zealand lives. It's made a huge difference to everyone's outlook.
Having worked all her life, winning Lotto means she no longer has to. The daily grind is replaced by an appreciation for life's more simple pleasures.
If there's a unique experience going and it costs $200, before I wouldn't have entertained the idea. Now I try not to think twice about it. I think, just do it. It can be as extravagant as buying a beautiful bar of soap instead of palm olive at the supermarket. It makes you appreciate the simple things as well.
Statistics Professor Martin Hazelton had one piece of parting wisdom for anyone considering spending hundreds on tickets.
If you're playing Lotto because, it's essentially a form of entertainment, you say you get this pleasurable feeling of anticipation, and if you're happy that it's a way of donating to charity, then good on you. If those are the reasons for playing, then go for it. But in terms of a scheme for money-making, that is not what Lotto is.
Those who are yet to purchase a ticket will have a few hours left, as Lotto Powerball jackpot will be drawn at 8 this evening. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, Nicholas Poynton.
Well, a couple of us spent the entire item speculating on what we would spend the Lotto money on, even though we haven't bought a ticket. Anyway, have a great evening. That is all we've got time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Green Party is holding out on new terrorism legislation because of concerns it could be applied to people who aren't terrorists. The officers who captured the man accused of the Christchurch mosque massacre are described as among the bravest in the history of the police force. The US Vice President Mike Pence and Donald Trump's personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani are refusing to cooperate with an impeachment inquiry. And scientists say the humpback whale population decimated by industrial whaling in the southwest Atlantic in the early 1900s is back to full strength. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Young black English players after the game spoke of how they wanted to make this a moment that they took action. One of the ways they responded to this was by giving Bulgaria an absolute thrashing.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
It sort of blew my mind a little bit. The player that I was watching sort of gets pushed back up into the sky and then gets sucked into the black hole.
Up to date